You're listening to
They're gonna call it a hard foul. They're gonna call it a hard foul.
All right, everyone. It's been a little over a week since we last talked to you, and in that time, the Celtics have split two games at home against the Kings and the Pelicans. And Mike's wearing the hot foul merch that he's showing off right there to the left of the screen. Mike, this team is really exhibiting some careless basketball at home, especially over since December into January. Um, and it just feels unfocused, particularly in the fourth quarter for this team on a lot of the stuff that has happened. Even if you look at the last two games, and look, the Kings, I think, shot over 50% from three. The Pelicans played really, really well. So you give them credit, but at the same time, against the Kings, Jason Tatum has 7 turnovers, including key ones in the fourth quarter. A lot of them live ball turnovers. Against the Pelicans, I think Brown had 5, much of them live ball, 3 of them consecutively, almost the same exact play of Zion Williams just stripping him, and just not being aware of what's going on. So
First
it's
half.
like
Those are
just careless
flashback, like
basketball. Yeah, go ahead.
PTSD, like, Ime Udoka coaching them versus the Miami Heat and Golden State Warriors, or Joe Mazzulla's first year against the Miami Heat. Man, like, that Kings game was so pathetic. Yeah, I understand the Kings. I don't know if they won the other night and the winning streak ended, but I think they were at 7 games in a row after beating Boston. Doug Christie, I believe the name is, that former shooting guard for Sacramento, was 7-0 as a coach right out the jump. But De'Aaron Fox wasn't even playing, number one. 2, I think Sacramento's the only team in the NBA that doesn't have a shot blocker on the entire roster. Like, they just don't have. They don't have a guy who can block shots. And the Celtics couldn't figure that out on offense. Like, they have one of the worst defensive teams in the NBA. I don't care what the numbers say. They're not good defensively. They don't have like a defensive presence. DeMar DeRozan's never been a good defender. Malik Monk certainly isn't a good defender. Like, who on Sacramento is shutting down the Boston Celtics to score what? What did they score? Was it 96 points or 94?
97.
Yeah,
They just fell apart in that fourth, and
like
the shooting woes have continued. The turnovers have continued. They did give unique looks to Tatum in that game that I think threw him off. But
yeah.
But it's this continued, just performance, and especially in the fourth quarter, and the starts of the fourth quarter have been really, really bad for the Celtics for the most part. They have been really, really bad at home in particular. And you go back, you look at the Kings game, you look at the Sixers game, you look at the Grizzly games. I mean, there really is a trend here. You could go back to the Pacers.
Well, and they're
But the
11
Pacers
losses.
were playing out. And look, they played some teams that played really, really well against them too. There is a trend here of teams playing really, really well, but the mistakes, a lot of them are self-inflicted. And that's the troubling part. It's just unfocused basketball. And I think, we can continue to chalk that up as a team coming off a championship or whatever, but those habits eventually come back to bite you if you don't get on top of it, and I think that's a concerning part right now, is that they think they can just roll the ball out there and turn it on whenever they want, and they're clearly not being able to do that while they're at home. And
yeah, I mean, you're spot on, Jim. You really are. Like, there's a stat in their 11 losses this year that offensively in the fourth quarter during those 11 losses, they're 32nd in the NBA in offensive efficiency. I believe that's the worst you can be. And it's something like 23rd in the NBA in defensive
and at home,
efficiency.
it's been even worse defensively. At home, it's been even worse.
And at home, it's been even worse.
Per 100 possessions, they put it up on the telecast the other night. They are the worst in the league in these home losses, particularly going back to December. And it's hard to really understand what's going on, especially when they've come back and they're fully healthy. this is a fully healthy starting five
Well,
right
they've
now.
been playing worse fully healthy,
They
right?
have, yeah.
Yeah. And I think a big part of it too, and it's really disrupting the flow of their entire game on offense and defense, is the fact that they are not hitting threes. They're
Not
not
at
hitting
all.
outside shots at all. And it's not like they're missing long. Derek White, his shots aren't even close these last 2 or 3 games. And it is across the board. The only consistent 3-point shooter really for like a month now has really been Tatum. Um, they don't have consistency from players from beyond the arc. It's just night to night. They have multiple guys who can't hit. Um, and one thing I did like about the Pelicans game, even though they fell apart, at least we saw them scoring at a high level uh, with 2-point shots, because once again, they might have hit 13 to 14 threes, but they shot like 31% from 3-point range. This is a problem, and this is something in my mind that Celtics fans don't like to hear. But for the Boston Celtics, that percentage has to go up. They need to hit threes to win a championship. That is the way they are built. I want them to be able to score in the paint. I want them to post up. I want them to have multiple ways to beat you, because in the playoffs, they showed us last year, they can do that when shooting a low percentage from 3. But they have to get better. They have to
But
get better.
it's also not just how well poorly they're shooting; it's how well the other team is shooting.
Well, that's a problem too.
They're giving up some really good looks from 3. They've been giving up corner threes. I mean, the Kings shot almost 40% against them. The Pelicans were over 40%. The Sixers were over 40%. I mean, the only game where they actually defended the 3 well was in that Pacers game, where I think they limited the Pacers to only 9 threes, but the Pacers hit everything else. And I mean, the Pacers are rolling right now, with the exception of last night, and that might had to do with Halliburton.
Well, their best scorer got thrown out too,
and so they're not hitting, and they're not defending the 3 well, and so you can make as many twos as you want, you won't win. You can keep going to the hoop. You won't win if you don't defend the 3-point line, and you can't hit threes. And I think that's what's going on. And so percentage-wise, they've been down, but they've also, like, the Kings hit 7 more threes than the Celtics, so that's 21 points. The Pelicans, I think, hit 5 more threes. That's 15 more points from an area where they usually are way. So those are holes that are tough to dig yourself out of. But I'll say this to Mike: the Pelicans game was a 1-point game, not because they didn't hit threes down the stretch. It's because they missed 2 free throws with Jason Tatum.
That's right.
They dropped the ball out of bounds with Derek White. They couldn't.
The inbound pass.
They could not inbound the ball with 5 seconds. Got called for a 5-second count. They gave up an offensive rebound that got the game within, I think 1. So it was.
I can't believe CJ McCollum missed that shot too.
These were things after, and this all happened within 30 to 45 seconds left in the game. Yeah. After they, from about the 2.5 minute on, they played nearly perfect basketball. Tatum was determined to get the win. He missed a layup, got his own rebound, dunked it, all those things on the fast break. And then they got complacent again. And so it wasn't threes. I don't think the Pelicans hit a 3 down the stretch. It was that they're not doing the little things to win basketball games. So it's a combination of both. If they shoot better in these games, they're clearly winning them. It's a combination of a lot of things. It's a combination. You get teams coming in playing really well. I mean, the Pelicans, that's the first time, maybe the second time all year, where they had Murray, Williams, and Murphy. They have good players. Like, you look at that roster, they have good players. They're not going to win the Cooper Flag sweepstakes. They're just not, unless they find a way to trade them all or convince them all to be hurt. There's just way too much talent on that team. That team could be a playoff team or contend for a play-in spot out west if they were healthy.
That's the story every year with that.
If they were healthy all year. The Kings, They're probably playing the best basketball they've been playing all year when they came into the Garden. The
The
Pacers
last 2 years.
on the roll. The Memphis had been on a roll. The Sixers played the best game of the season against the Celtics. So there's that, but there's also that they're not responding to it well.
No, they're falling apart.
And they
Yeah.
almost feel like if they just show up, they should beat them. And it's these teams are out to get them, and they're better than they think. The Celtics, like the teams I just mentioned, are all loaded with talent. Like the
So
Sixers
if you
were
don't show up,
completely healthy that game. They were loaded with talent. Like so, you need to show up and be ready to go. Um, so if the shooting gets better, that certainly helps. But I kind of see that as much of a luck thing. Sometimes there's other things they can control that have bothered me more. Whether
yeah,
it's the
yeah.
defensive side or it's these turnovers. That Kings game, how many of those live ball turnovers, just the fast break difference in the Kings and the Pelicans game, that was another stat that blew your mind. Like, just because of live ball turnovers.
Yeah, so many of them.
Yeah.
So many of them. And I agree with you. Like, I'm definitely more concerned about their fourth quarter play and their just lack of focus and falling apart and their star players turning the ball over a lot, and the role players not shooting the ball well, is something that can be fixed and expected to be fixed. But there's a lot of holes in this team right now in the way they're playing. And on the last pod, I think you were right when you said it. Like, last season's over. They're not the NBA champions of this season. They have to earn it to get it. And right now, in your mind, they're the third best team in the NBA. And I agree with you on that, and that they have a lot to work to do to catch up to OKC, um, to catch up to Cleveland. And quite honestly, like, the way they're playing right now gives me pause. Like, wow, could they be upset by Indiana? Could they be upset by a healthy Orlando team that's hungry if they don't get their shit together? I think absolutely. So I'm pretty, like, I'm feeling urgency as a fan to see some games here where they're playing the right way, because it's starting to get frustrating, and I'm starting to worry a little bit about their chances here.
Yeah, and you mentioned those East teams, and like Cleveland's clearly the team that you fear the most, but the Pacers are really starting to put it together and look like the Pacers of last year, and it looked like
They're rolling. They should add. I hope that. Yeah, they're rolling. Man. They are
Orlando, with Vancaro back, and if they get Wagner back, they.
Now, is that a possibility that they can get Franz back?
I
Because the
think
two
so.
of them together is kind of lethal.
And then, you still have a lot of talent with the Knicks. So you have teams in the East that if this team lets these bad habits creep into their playoff play or creep into their identity, and it's slowly happening, it could be problematic. It really could. It could be problematic.
And even with all the Jimmy Butler stuff, I think Miami's up to 3 or 4 games over 500 right now. There's like a litany of teams that are the East just isn't as bad.
Let's talk trade deadline, and let's stipulate a couple things right off the top here. Because of the rules, there's certain things the Celtics can't do. They can't aggregate contracts, meaning you can't combine 2 contracts on the Celtics roster to match a single player's on another. So you can't combine Kata and Springer for a $6 million player. It's not allowed.
And they can't get buyout plays.
Unless it's less than the mid-level, the taxpayer mid-level. So it has to be a dollar for dollar trade. Unless the team has cap space that they can take your player into. So the Washington Wizards, for example, they need to get up to the floor of the cap. They could take in Jaden Springer for 3 second-round picks. And that deal can get done. So that's kind of what the Celtics are dealing with. They're very limited on the moves they can make. And there's also extension guys that make things even more complicated to trade if you start thinking about guys like Pritchard or Hauser or White, guys like that. It becomes a little more complicated because they're dealing with the last year of their current contract and the extension kicks in next year. So those are kind of the stipulations on this. Um, I might be wrong on Hauser. Maybe Hauser's into his new extension now. I forget, but um, you get a sense of what's going on. I think. Well, I'll just stop, Mike. Where I think the most likely thing is exactly what I said off the top. I think they're going to trade Springer into cap space somewhere. His $4 million contract is costing them $16 million for a guy that's not playing and is not going to make their rotation. So they're going to look to get rid of him. And then maybe you probably see a guy like Lonnie Walker. They'll try to bring him back on the league minimum deal for shorter money than Springer because Springer's on that rookie extension contract. And you got a guy that will probably play and can shoot and can score and is, from all reports, tearing it up in Europe and Lonnie Walker. And that kind of helps your team right there initially. So that's my guess on what it will look like the Celtics will do. There are some other names. I'll kind of let you jump into that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I don't know if they'll get 3 second-round picks for Springer. I think maybe one very protected second-round pick if they unload his contract. But
well, they want to get rid of him, and the Wizards know, so they'll get more than one.
Oh, you mean the Celtics attaching the picks to him? Yeah, that makes more sense. Yeah, I mean, there's names out there that they make they're smaller contract guys that you could maybe trade like a Jordan Walsh for, which might make sense to open up a spot for a guy who maybe shoots the ball better, like a Drew Peterson, where the Celtics are struggling to shoot the ball right now to give you more offense. But I know a name that's been out there, Jim, is Javonte Green. We just played against him in the Pelicans. Do you think he makes sense as a guy for the Celtics to target?
Yeah, his contract certainly makes sense. It's a $2 million contract. You could roll him right in. How they make that trade kind of work, I'm not exactly sure what they would do, but maybe Springer's involved in it somehow. But no, he would make. He'd make a lot of sense. He's playing at a pretty good clip. He's not a knockdown shooter, but he shoots 35% from three, so not bad shooter at all. A good defender. You saw what he was doing against Tatum in that fourth quarter, and a good aggressive defender. Limited on a little bit of his size on the wing. He's been here before. He's well liked by the organization. The culture aspect of it wouldn't be a problem. He knows a lot of guys on the team, so all that stuff I think makes sense, and it will help you get through the regular season. You probably won't see a minute in the playoffs. But it would help you get through the regular season, and it would give you a guy that you'd be willing to play at the wing where Mazzulla doesn't really seem like he has that right now. He doesn't seem to have anyone he trusts for that backup wing position. It just doesn't exist off the bench of the Celtics right now, whether that's Springer or Walsh or Peterson or Tillman. He's not playing them. So I think that definitely makes some sense.
Yeah, I think you just named some guys that could possibly get moved. Like maybe they can move Xavier Tillman for a guy who makes the same contract. Same with the Jordan Walsh. Those are certainly names I think we're going to hear as we get closer to the deadline to open up roster spots for different players. There's a name that is all out there all over Twitter that I think is kind of a very, very long shot dream scenario. Utah would be looking for, I think last I heard was 2 first-round picks unprotected for Walker Kessler. Certainly makes a lot of sense for the Celtics with their struggle on the defensive glass. He is a decent offensive player inside. I think he fits with any team in the NBA. He's a good player. If you're chasing this ring, do you consider, giving up future assets for a guy that'll be here for a year or two? Maybe, right? So that's an interesting name that I think a lot of NBA teams are going to be calling about. I would imagine to Utah.
Yeah, no, I think it's someone. Maybe it's worth calling Danny and just seeing how available he might be. And look, you would have to really overpay for him, and maybe you're okay doing that for these reasons. Like Porzingis is injury history is a legitimate concern. it's a legitimate concern in a sense of will he be available for the playoffs? There are two different. They've become two different teams. Like one of the things we didn't mention when we were talking about their struggles at home was points in the paint anymore, because that is not how the teams are attacking them since Porzingis has been back. It's
Yeah.
been the 3-point shot, which I think that's something they can correct even with Porzingis on the floor. I mean, they're attacking Porzingis different ways to get free from three, but that's something that they've corrected in the past and have been much better at than they've been recently. With Porzingis off the floor, they've gotten killed with points in the paint. Kessler obviously is a deterrent for that. Now you can still attacking with smaller guys and things like that, but it gives you that insurance policy that's better than anything you have right now. He's also a club option for next year at $4.5 million. So he's cost controlled there. So it would be kind of a 2-year or year-and-a-half deal, and it would give you that insurance.
The other thing too is if Al Horford is going to continue to struggle shooting the basket, he doesn't do things that Walker Kessler does.
No.
And if you're able to get a Walker Kessler, I would imagine that Luke Cornett would be an attractive asset to a lot of teams where maybe you could recruit.
He has a no-trade clause. So
Luke Cornett has a no-trade clause?
Because of the amount of years he's been signed under this veteran minimum. So that gets a little bit more difficult to move.
Yeah, so he's on.
His contract lines up, I think, very closely with Neemias Queta. So that's one.
That seems like
you could
the transition there is going to happen.
Yeah. They could make a deal. They could swing a deal like that. It would become more of whether or not Danny wants to give it up, and if the Celtics, they wouldn't. I think it would take more than 2 firsts because of where they're drafting, and it would. You'd kind of have to push your chips in for Walker Kessler and think. It's kind of like the Yaka Pirtle potential deal a few years ago, right? And there was a hole at center. There was concern there going into the playoffs.
Long term, it hurts.
Was willing to give more than you were.
Long term, it hurts the organization. In the short term, I mean, I really think it pushes them back into the conversation of one of the best teams in the NBA with an acquisition like that. It'd be interesting. Like I said, I think there will be a lot of teams calling. There are certainly teams that could use an extra big. San Antonio comes to mind. Atlanta certainly comes to mind where he would be a really good fit.
Well, the Knicks, the Lakers, other contenders too. That would be calling on him right away. So I think he's a sought after asset. There's no doubt about it. But Danny has recently said he's not available. I don't know if that's posturing, if that's something look, if Cooper flags a goal in Utah, it makes a little bit of sense to trade Walker Kessler, unless you plan on shutting him down and playing him with Cooper flag next year. So I think, you definitely call on it. I don't know how realistic it is, but it's something I would definitely call on. Sims over in the Knicks, maybe he's another big that could potentially be available, but I don't think the Knicks will want to deal with you at all. So that probably.
I'm not dealing. I'm not dealing for a big unless it's Walker Kessler, right? I'm going after a win. Hunting the end.
That's an even tougher market to find any wins available with the constraints you're working with. Like, I know you mentioned Cam Whitmore in a text to me, but that's a 4-year deal where a guy's making $4 million a year. That's $16 million, and it goes up that they're paying for that contract while they're trying to sell the team. So, year over year,
a guy who's upset about not playing in Houston, I don't see the fit anymore because he's going to come to Boston and he may even have less playing time.
Yeah. So I like, if there's a wing out there, maybe, I don't know what,
where's Jeff Green playing these days?
Yeah, Jeff Green's a good example. I don't know.
Oh, he's in Houston. He's not available. He's on a contender.
So, I'm not sure, Mike. It's going to be tough to swing a deal. Maybe the only other thing maybe I bring up to you is that does Brad think a little bit like Bill Belichick used to and say, Porzingis, we maybe maxed him out already. Maybe I dangle him at the deadline and see what I can get in return because I don't know if I'm going to get anything for him in the playoffs. I don't plan to re-sign him after next season. Um, Maybe this is the best time to move him. I think
I
that
mean,
would be
yeah.
foolish basketball
Are
and
they
football.
allowed to?
You know,
Are they allowed to take two players back and the team aggregate contracts to trade with the Celtics?
I believe so, but they would need not to be over the tax.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, it's something that I would be careful about to try not to get it out there to the media that it's happening. But I think you have to. You have to always see if you can better your team. If you can't, and you make the trade, right? And that's for any player on the Celtics, probably except Jason Tatum. If there's a trade out there for one of these guys and makes you better, then you do it, obviously. And Porzingis probably makes the most sense, but I doubt that would
Yeah,
happen. I think
I doubt that
it's tough to
too.
make that trade.
Yeah, I think it's a trade that big with the amount of complications that are involved because of the apron. You need an off season, not a deadline to make that happen.
You really do.
Yeah.
And that takes me to the trade deadline. How active do you think it'll actually be? There's so many rules in place. There are a lot of teams that want to make it into the play-in, so they're going to be active, but it is really hard to make
Well,
trades. And there are a lot of teams that can't.
Makes the CBA even more just stupid. Like I think this has hurt the league. Trade deadlines are supposed to be fun. You're supposed to have rumors up to the last minute. Maybe there's a deal, maybe there isn't. Your offseason is supposed to be fun. You have guys that just aren't getting moved because there isn't a lot of value because of these restrictions of the CBA for teams to, say, okay, let's, I'll take on Zach LaVine's contract for a little while, or I can fit him in and I'll pay the tax and I'll still have some flexibility. Or, Vucevic, or you name these veteran players that typically get moved that continue to stay on their squads. Like Jimmy Butler is going to be a hard guy to trade. It's going to be a hard guy to trade, and not because he's not wanted. It's because you have these gymnastics that you have to kind of do, and you're only allowed to do so much. And then if you go over the apron, you already started in that jail. Like I don't know what Houston's number is now, but where would a guy like Jimmy Butler place that? And then what does that mean going forward into their offseason? So it's like it becomes difficult. I think this is going to be a really interesting case study with Jimmy Butler, because you could go past that deadline and there might not be a real offer out there for him. And then is this a thing that's, does it change on how stars are able to demand trades or whatnot?
I hope that happens. I think the only team he deserves to go to is Washington. Just waste his career there. That's how I feel about guys who quit on their team. So I hope Pat Riley doesn't move him. Says fuck you. That's how I feel. But I agree with you as far as the CBA. It really ruins the trade deadline. It seems really hard for teams to make deals. Like Portland's probably got some guys that they could move, like a Rob Williams that would help a contender, but it just feels impossible to happen because you can't put guys together to match that contract to make the trade. Like you're going to have even like the mid-level guys not getting moved, and it hurts. It gave an advantage to these teams like San Antonio and OKC, who and probably Utah, who got all these draft picks prior to all this happening, because they have so much flexibility when other teams don't. Like if OKC wanted to, the problem with OKC is their management, in my opinion, they never want to spend money. They could go all in on Jimmy Butler. There's nothing stopping them from doing it.
The chemistry is so good right now. There's maybe an argument on why not to do that from a pure basketball perspective. I think the Butler stuff's interesting. And then you mentioned Portland, Brooklyn. There's a lot of teams that probably want to sell off parts. Utah's probably another great example of that. With some players that typically would be attractive to teams around the deadline that are looking to contend or get into the playoffs, or But if you're like a middling team that typically would want to make a splash, just get into a round or two, why would you take on a $15 million contract over the next 3 years that could limit your ability to really advance your team in the coming seasons? It doesn't make a lot of sense with this new CBA. It makes things pretty difficult.
Yep.
So it's interesting to see what will happen. I think this Cooper flag tankathon is real. I think,
Worse
yeah,
for 42 the other night.
yeah. So I think there's going to be a real effort to try to move off players, so you can really suck. I mean, the Pelicans would be an interesting team from that perspective. Shut down Zion, and maybe start trading some of these other veteran.
He'll probably shut himself down, quite
What?
honestly. Yeah.
What's that?
He'll probably shut himself down, honestly.
Yeah.
The Pelicans have had enough.
This is the type of guy that you're just waiting to go through a Wendy's naked, at night. It's just a space shot. But yeah. So as far as the deadline, we'll see how it goes. It's February 6th, I think, right? So there's some time here. But
if I was Philadelphia, quite honestly, I would think about shutting my stars down and try to get that sweepstakes. That's what I would be thinking about.
Yeah. Well, the thing with
you're losing, and Embiid's not playing.
That would have to come from ownership, because you guys like Nick Nurse and the GM over there are probably afraid right now for the jobs, and so that's the last thing they want to do.
Well, that GM should get fired for the stupid move. See, Paul George is just an abysmal move that he just made.
Yeah, he looks
Nick Nurse is an overrated coach. Like, fire them both and tank. Yeah.
So, Mike, we finally got some ownership news. And
yes, we did.
So this is directly from Adam Himmelsbach, beat writer for the Globe. His tweet, and you can of course read the whole article. But a new letter to stakeholders obtained by the Globe states that the Celtics will begin receiving bids from prospective buyers on January 23rd, and that ownership is pleased with the broad level of interest that has emerged. Obviously, this is the first bit of news we've heard in a while on this. You wonder what that means, broad bit of interest. Is that saying that and getting this date out there because they really don't have the amount of interest that they want, and they're hoping to, nothing fuels inspiration like a deadline, to get people to act. So the deadline is out there.
I think they may be getting less
soon.
I think the reality is that they're going to get less than what they thought, and also there's probably some fear in buying the Celtics because it's not a financially good investment right now. Long term, certainly could be. You don't own the stadium that they play in, so you're not going to make money there, and then you're going to owe a ton of money every year in the tax unless you really make some drastic changes. So which means you would come in and the fan base would hate you immediately. So it's they're a great franchise, and they certainly can win some more championships, but you have to lose a lot of money for that to happen. So whoever's buying this, it's got to be like a toy and not a financial investment for the first, maybe decade that you own the team.
Yeah. So that kind of brings me to my advice question for you today, Mike.
Oh, God.
And it leads us to the ownership stake. And this might be a Pastor Mike question because there is some morality issues here that I think we should touch on. There was a report, and might have been from Cameron Tabata Bay, who we had on this pod recently, if I remember correctly, from USA Today, that UAE was interested. Their investors were interested in being a prospective buyer.
A country is interested in buying Boston Celtics?
Yes. So,
what?
Yep. United Arab Emirates, they are a country over in the Middle East. That's where the Celtics were. That's where Abu Dhabi is. That's where the Celtics were during the preseason. This is done all the time. In soccer, a lot of soccer teams are owned by these national groups, whether it's the Saudi back or the UAE back. And obviously, this has not really come to North American sports, not to American sports, but there's been interest for the NFL, the NBA, and there was a report that Wick, while they were over there, met with some folks to see if they would have interest behind the Celtics.
They have a
This
lot.
would obviously need to be approved by the Board of Governors, but the NBA is already dipping their toes there as well. You know, they have the Emirates Cup, they call it now, and they were over there in the preseasons with the Celtics and the Nuggets. So the positive, the upside to this, as we get advice from Mike, is that this is a place that the tax would never be a concern.
Yeah, sure.
You know, and they probably could invest and build their own basketball arena if they really wanted to and find the place to do it without any problem. The negatives is, Pastor Mike, this is a country that is riddled with human rights violations.
Yeah, I know. This is
including speaking out, religious expression. They actually had a Twitter social media program about speaking out against the government, and if you violated, they came from you. There's forced labor practices.
How could you?
So
how could you have what we had in the bubble with all the celebration of like Black Lives Matter, you know, speaking out against the isms and just like taking a stand for human rights, and then go around and let this country buy an NBA franchise? Number one, this is an American league, an American sport. It should be owned by Americans who understand American people, who understand American culture, who understand the Boston Celtic, Massachusetts Boston Celtic fan, and New England, not somebody across the globe. So I'm against that, even if the country had great values. Number two, absolutely not. You cannot be owned by people who go against human rights just because they can pay into the tax. You'll have NBA players who don't want to play here for that reason, I believe. I can't imagine that Jaylen Brown would be okay with it. If he is, it kind of goes against everything he's ever stood for.
The example is soccer, and their players are being traded for.
And there's a reason.
Well, it's a world sport, and it's probably the most profitable. And you see what players are being paid and purchased for.
I'm not saying I don't understand. I'm saying my advice is no. I'm very much against it.
Oh yeah, I'm just telling you the other side of this. I don't think the players, the checks are written, are going to care.
I have a hard time continuing to root for the team. And maybe that's crazy, but that's how I feel.
And I will say this is coming, whether it's the Celtics or somebody else, and it's going to be somebody else's in our sports here in North America. It'll be with our NFL teams and our NBA teams.
I mean, we just made so much progress.
They're going to have a piece of this. I mean, you look right now, there is a professional golf league in the United States that is run by the Saudis. So,
I mean, you just made so much progress with getting rid of a guy like a Donald Sterling, right? And now we're just going to that is, to me, it's like so disingenuous about like we stand for something. It just is. It just.
Well, Mike, I would tell you to take a look at a lot of the owners around the league and really wonder if what they stand for, what they actually care about too.
Yeah.
And including prospective buyers outside of UAE that would want to come in here. I too would have a problem with it. I agree with you. I think that the specific human rights violations, these are sanctioned by a government, and then now they would be the governors of your team, and that would be a really tough thing to swallow, knowing that when you purchase a ticket, where exactly is that money going, and what are you funding, and what are you supporting with your purchase? So there is that. So it's just an interesting discussion. It's going to be interesting to see who is going to bid on the Celtics. And there is, I think, and I hate to be the bearer of bad news, I think there are a lot more pitfalls for Celtics fans in this process than there are opportunity. And I think it's kind of worrisome.
Yeah, well, they're an expensive team, right? And so that's why this season, I've been saying all season long, I feel like there's urgency to winning a championship again, because I think it's going to get very difficult in years to come. So, when I talked about Walker Kessler earlier, like, yeah, I think I would go all in for a player that's cheap and talented like he is, because I want to get this championship before I have to move Derek White for financial reasons. Which are like, these are the type of things we might see happen. Like, your most valuable player who's paid a big contract will have to get moved. So yeah, I think that's where we are. And you make good points about American owners too. Absolutely, there's some scumbags that own teams and who don't own teams anymore because we finally got rid of them. And there's probably some prospective buyers who have business practices who treat their employees horrible. So that's true too. We'll have to wait and see what happens, Jim. We have no control over any of it.
All right, Mike. Well, with that, we're going to wrap, and we'll see what happens with ownership. We'll see what happens at the trade deadline. We got the All-Star game coming up that we didn't even talk about in potential.
Another very funny advice column today. They play Toronto, and then they're on the road in Atlanta. That's what's coming up, right?
Yeah, then it's out west. Yeah, then a lot of Western Conference teams. Yep. So
actually, some good games coming up.
Yeah, there is. All right, guys. We'll talk to you soon.